Hey guys, how's it going? So it's been a couple weeks. Figured I'd make a video by now, and we are a couple weeks now into the Trump administration. 47th president. I thought it'd be pretty fitting if I did another tier list. This time, instead of talking directly about politics, I'll be ranking the United States presidents. So um, excited to get started with this. As usual, with these tier lists, there is going to be some bias in here, again, though I've tried to keep it out of this. The major rule about this tier list is just um, that I kind of want to rank these guys according to what they did as president, whether I think it was good or not for the country, whilst kind of putting aside their character, as much as that kind of hurts me to say. Because if I was basing this off their character, a lot of these guys would be in the C, D, F tier, especially the earlier presidents. Um, but I'll be basing it solely off of their presidency. Also, apologies if I'm a little echoey. I'm starting to film in my own little office room here instead of my bedroom, so it might be a little echoey. So let's get started. And yeah, also before, I'll be probably doing this into two parts just because this is a lot more of a big tier list and gives me a little bit more time to explain each of these guys and why I put them where they are. So I'll probably split this into two parts, split it down the middle. So yeah, but now that that's out of the way, let's begin. So, first president of the United States, George Washington. Solely off his presidency, I think it's pretty obvious. George Washington is an S tier. Um, Pretty much sets the standards for what a president should be. He's our first president. Um, he could have done anything with that power, and he chose to make it, in a sense, a servant of the people. He willingly steps down after 2 terms in office, sets up the major rules and limitations of the president. When you have such an important figure like a beginner setting the standard, there's not really any other place they deserve to be other than A or S tier. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum here, we have John Adams, who I think was a much better um, vice president or politician in general than he was president. As a president, he's probably in the D tier. Um, I think the things that are most notable about him in terms of his presidency are the Alien and Sedition Acts that he put into law, pretty much allowing him to deport anyone of his choice. There's also a lot of mass censorship when it came to criticism of the government, so little hypocritical of a founding father. I think his reputation is definitely tarnished by this act, and it's what's got him so low here in D tier. So, yeah, John Adams probably a D tier. Thomas Jefferson. Oh man. So personally, I don't really like Thomas Jefferson. As a president, again, I'm keeping bias out of here. I'm trying to. As president, I think he was good. I think he's probably a B tier. It's just before he becomes president and after he becomes president, his life is shrouded in, you know, pretty harsh realities. He had done some pretty terrible stuff that could be considered treasonous. I believe it was during the Napoleonic Wars. He tried to encourage the French to attack American ships. Um, Also, his whole rivalry with Alexander Hamilton. Much more of a Hamilton guy myself, so obviously I don't like Jefferson that much. But putting that aside, I think Jefferson's probably a B tier. Again, there's a few things that are most well known during his presidency. Obviously, the Louisiana Purchase is accomplished under him. He buys that massive territory for the United States. And under his administration, we first see this idea of manifest destiny, that it's America's destiny to expand from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And while people on their own have fundamental disagreements with this, if I'm taking it as an approach of how does it benefit the country as a whole, obviously a massive gain in territory is going to be good for the country. So, um, aside from his personality, Thomas Jefferson, pretty solid president. Probably put him in the B tier. James Madison. I think James Madison's probably a C tier. So for me, there are a lot of good things about Madison, and there's also a lot of bad things about Madison that kind of put him in the middle here. Obviously, the main two are, or the main thing is, he helped lead us through the War of 1812. Right, our second conflict with Britain got us out of that conflict. That's the pro. The con is he got us into a war with the British in the War of 1812. Kind of pretty much instigated it. Um, Leads to the burning of the White House, a massive amount of English victories. So while he got us into the war, he also let us out of it. It's generally looked upon as either an American loss or a stalemate. Apart from that, I mean, James Madison's a pretty qualified individual to become president. I think he's one of the last ever to have actively led men into battle. He's kind of, as much as he is qualified, he has some good and bad to him. So I'm going to put James Madison in the C tier. James Monroe, probably put him at the top of B tier here. A fun fact about him is he won his second term pretty much without competition. No one was brave enough to compete with him for his second term, so he just won. He just won it by himself. So James Monroe, I think again, big thing about this guy is the Monroe Doctrine. Now, for me, this idea of kind of staying neutral and allowing the world to conduct its own affairs, mainly Europe, is something that I subscribe to a lot. I don't like when we interfere in a lot of other people's lives. So I'm personally a fan of the Monroe Doctrine, and I think that definitely plays some part in where I put him here. And it also is very heavily anti imperialism, anti colonial, Jesus, anti colonization, which again, very pro for that here. I think James Monroe, another really qualified guy to be president. I think he's top of B tier here. John Quincy Adams, again, a pretty qualified guy to be president. Um, a lot of the things about him are his kind of elitist attitude. He's very upward about himself, I guess you could say. He likes to present himself as kind of superior to everyone else, and obviously that poses a bit of a problem. But again, John Quincy Adams, I mean, I think most famous for his infrastructure efforts and also role in education. Nothing too special or out of the ordinary to say about him, but I mean, I think JQA is probably like pretty good president. There's a lot more good things to say about him, in my opinion, than bad things, so it keeps him out of C tier here. Also, son of John Adams, I believe, so there you go. Andrew Jackson. Oh boy, so Andrew Jackson, the first Democratic president. I'm going to put him in the D tier here, below John Adams. There is a good thing to say about Andrew Jackson. He's, I believe, the first and only president to wipe the U.S. clean of its national debt. But for me, that's about where it ends. Obviously, I'm placing him here, as I'm sure some of you are aware, for his blatant mistreatment of Native Americans, him kind of forcing them to immigrate far, far westward. His complete disregard for the authority of Congress. I believe it had something to do with the Native Americans, actually, Trail of Tears, where they tried to stop him from forcing these people out, but he said something along the lines of, now that they've said it, let's see if they can enforce it, or something like that. So complete disregard for the power of Congress. To some people, he's a pretty good president. In my opinion, no, I can't have him. He's not the worst. By no means he's the worst, because there are some presidents down here that just baffle me in how they ever got that position. But Andrew Jackson, bottom of D tier right now. Followed closely by his vice president, Martin Van Buren. And pretty much what to say about Van Buren is he's just another Andrew Jackson. But another bad thing added on to his presidency is the Panic of 1837, I believe. So, president during an economic crisis, which isn't on its by itself something that's caused by the president, but still, it kind of definitely tarnishes his reputation. Um, Again, just as a follow up of Jackson, he's going to be in the D tier here. Although I will say, I mean, look at that facial hair, right? Um, so yeah, Martin Van Buren's going to be a D tier. William Henry Harrison is going to be non applicable because he dies 1 month into his presidency. Um, some people have speculated it from a kind of like cold or flu. I think the most agreeable one is that I think he'd gotten sick from a sickness from drinking the local water, something like that. But not enough information to go about Harrison here. He's going to be non applicable. And John Tyler is his vice president, quickly becomes president. John Tyler's kind of a eh. There's nothing he does that's necessarily bad that I can at least think of, but he also doesn't really do anything spectacular. If anything, I think the thing I most know well about John Tyler is um, he serves as a Confederate congressman during the American Civil War. So he's a turncoat, essentially. Um, but again, as how that reflects on his presidency, I can't really say. Might change this later, but he's just going to go in C tier. I can't really say too much about John Tyler. James K. Polk. So I think obviously the big things when we talk about Polk are the Mexican American War. He gets us into that war, we defeat Mexico, and we get this big westward expansion out west. Now, again, I know a lot of people probably disagree with that, and to an extent, I also do. The way that it was conducted, the way it was handled, I do not like. But still, the gaining of so much territory is on its own a benefit for the country. So for that, he gets praise in that respect. Also, he's a very kind of maybe reserved or understanding of the position. He says that he's only going to serve one term, and he doesn't run again. So he's very respecting of the power of the presidency. And in fact, he probably doesn't even get a chance to run because he dies shortly after he leaves office. So I would probably put Polk, honestly, probably probably B tier. I've done this before and I put him in A tier, but I think just on its own, the Mexican American War probably isn't enough. Kind of similar to Thomas Jefferson, positive of gaining territory, but that's about it, at least that I can think of. Zachary Taylor, who dies 1 year into his presidency, I believe. He's okay. Um, so, I mean, the main thing about Zachary Taylor, I believe, during his presidency, he's a very like kind of reserved guy. He doesn't really use his influence in Congress, and he's not really known for using his power a lot. Um, Although we can give him some credit, he did sort of um, slow down the process the country was going down of civil war. He was very, despite the fact that I believe he owned slaves, he was very much pro union, very much anti slavery, anti the South seceding, Mexican American War veteran. I'd probably put him C tier here. Millard Fillmore. There's a plane going over right now. So Millard Fillmore is the first of a long line, well, not a really long line, but a line of presidents that do absolutely nothing to stop the country from going down the inevitable road of civil war. Millard Fillmore is probably a D tier, bottom of D tier. The main reason is his handling of the, I believe, the Missouri Compromise, or it was either that or the Fugitive Slave Act. Um, just allowed for Southerners to re-enter the North to attack, or not attack, geez, to capture escaped slaves. Very clearly just trying to kick the can down the road. I don't think he was very much, I don't think he was openly like pro slavery, pro Southern secession, but he also did absolutely nothing to stop the process. So he's going to go at the bottom of D tier here. Followed by Franklin Pierce, who is a bit of a tragic character. So Franklin Pierce, uh, most notably when he was on the train to his inauguration, the train got into an accident and he witnessed his young son get decapitated, unfortunately for him, which pretty much influences his entire presidency. He's pretty much drunk the entire time, is depressed, and that definitely reflects in his presidency. I think he's probably an F tier. Honestly, Franklin Pierce, as much as I feel for the guy, very clearly just a do nothing president. Um, Expanded the border of Arizona a little bit when we took it from Mexico. That's about it, honestly. Franklin Pierce is, again, another president that did really nothing to kind of stop the expansion of slavery and the inevitable civil war that was coming. So it's going to probably be an F tier. I might move him up. We'll see. But James Buchanan is definitely an F tier. Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce being do nothing presidents. James Buchanan is the definition of a do nothing president. This man, at this point in the country's history, you can very clearly tell that there is a sharp divide growing between the North and the South. Some kind of conflict is inevitable, and James Buchanan does absolutely nothing. In some instances, he's actually very clearly pro slavery, or he's very much more in support of the South than he is of the Union on its own. He's also very clearly a guy that did not want the job. When he leaves office, there's this sense of relief kind of falls over him, and it begs the question as to why he became president at all. But I think James Buchanan's definitely an easy F tier. Followed by, in my opinion, our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln. Um, I feel like this doesn't really need explaining. I will speak on a lot of his criticism being his censorship of the press. Southern sympathy was not really allowed during his administration. Also, the violation of habeas corpus, imprisoning people without any just cause, and essentially are bad things. But you also have to keep in mind Lincoln is president during a time that these other presidents have never been through, and that is a civil war. You have to lead a broken country through this conflict. You have to lead a broken country through a conflict where you are fighting your own blood relatives in some essence. Um, and obviously, there are things he could have done much better, especially during the first few years of the war. But inevitably, he led us out of it. His stance on slavery, wanting it abolished, freedom of slaves, I think this is more than enough of an argument to say that he's possibly our greatest president. Obviously, could have done a lot of things better, but the problems that Lincoln faced the tragedies that Lincoln faced when he loses his son to an illness. Um, his perseverance as a president is just something that's truly inspiring, especially through such a dark time as the Civil War. I think Lincoln is just the best president. S tier. Him and George Washington up here. Then we have Andrew Johnson, who's an F tier. We're jumping up and down here. So Andrew Johnson was Abraham Lincoln's VP pick for his second term, um, and he's possibly our worst president. He's a Southern Democrat, but he's pro-union. However, when Reconstruction begins and the slaves are freed and the law needs to be upheld in the South, that this is just policy now. He does pretty much absolutely nothing to ensure that slave or that was a miswording of me, that the African Americans are treated well and fairly. He does absolutely nothing to ensure that. Pretty much undoes a lot of what Abraham Lincoln was working toward um, for Reconstruction. And people have actually blamed Johnson for a lot of the racial issues that still plague the country to this day. And in a sense, I agree. Johnson is easily probably our worst president ever. Ulysses S. Grant is kind of seeing a resurgence as of late. So, the main thing that people criticize for Grant is the tremendous amount of corruption and patronage that was going on in his administration. But this is something that he largely had nothing to do with. Um, he was a very naive kind of man. He was very trusting of those around him, and that was kind of a fault of his. But as an individual, this man was a saint. He was the leader, the commander of the armies as he was promoted by Lincoln during the Civil War, fought fervently for civil rights for blacks. Um, Basically eliminated the KKK for a long time until they come back under Woodrow Wilson's presidency. Um, and just I think this might be a bit high for me, but I think Grant's probably an A tier of a president, just because he tries to bring back what Lincoln was trying to accomplish before it was ruined by Johnson, um, and the fact that he's able to kind of do these things whilst also having to deal with the constant flood of corruption that is in his administration. I think he gets a lot of the flack for that, but I don't think he's responsible for most of it. I think Grant was a generally a very good man. He tried his hardest, and I think he did a pretty good job. Grant for me is going to be in the A tier. He's honestly one of my favorite presidents. So there's that. Rutherford B. Hayes. So for those of you who say that current elections and current politics are crazy and out of this world and dangerous, you have no idea what it was like to live through the election that Rutherford B. Hayes was elected in 1876, I believe. Him and Samuel Tilden are running as the Republican nominee versus the Democratic nominee. And it gets so bad that blacks in the South who even think about voting for the Republican candidate are murdered. There are attempts to begin another civil war, or there's talks of another civil war. That's how dangerous this election was. And there's even claims that it was stolen by Hayes, or that it was rigged because at the end of the day, a bunch of delegates came together to eventually decide who would win. And Hayes eventually got that nomination. But enough of that. What to say about Hayes? I mean, he's an kind of president. Um, I don't think you can really blame him for a lot of what people kind of clown on him for again, which is kind of people claiming that the election was rigged. Um, I don't really think that's his fault. I mean, this was just a man running for office. As what to say about Rutherford B. Hayes? I mean, he ends the Reconstruction in the South. So basically, the military's presence in the South to ensure black voting rights, black rights in general, is done. People clown on him for that, but the ultimate reality is Hayes, or Tilden, sorry, Tilden would have done the exact same thing. Reconstruction was coming to an end anyway. Um, I think Hayes is a lot. He's not the best president. He's kind of another. I'd probably put him here in the middle of C tier here. James Garfield is also going to be a non-applicable president. Dies, I think, again, like fairly early on into his presidency. I think it's only for a few months until he's killed. Um, I think he would have been one of our best presidents, but just not a lot to go off of for James Garfield here. Chester B. Arthur. So I think Chester B. Arthur is going to be another C tier kind of president. There's a few good things that I can say about him, and there's a lot of bad things I could say about him. The good things are he ends patronage. People close to you do not get political positions simply for being close to you. And he's also kind of the spearhead for the kind of construction or the buffering of the American Navy. So you can give him credit for that. The bad thing about his presidency is the anti Chinese sentiment that is plaguing the United States during his presidency. And I believe he even institutes a ban on Chinese immigration for a period of time. So he gets a lot of flack for that. With there being good things and obviously a pretty bad thing about his presidency, I think he's going to go in C tier here, probably behind Hayes. Grover Cleveland, before Donald Trump was elected for a second term, the only president to serve two non-consecutive terms. He wins one election, loses to Benjamin Harrison, and then wins another election. I think the thing most well known about Grover Cleveland is he's the president who has vetoed the most laws proposed by Congress, if I'm not wrong. When it comes to his policies, when it comes to his presidency as a whole, not too many things I can say about it that are necessarily bad. He's actually one of our better presidents, at least in my opinion. I would probably put him in probably bottom of B tier. If this wasn't talking about their personal lives, his life is shrouded in scandal. He marries a woman who was pretty much a daughter to him, and that obviously becomes a scandal around him. But I'm not going to talk about that. And then finally, the last one for this first part, Benjamin Harrison. The president who saw the most states enter the Union, I believe, kind of in a similar position to James Buchanan, where you can very clearly tell that Benjamin Harrison is a guy that does not want to be president, or at least that's kind of the sentiment that he expresses when he leaves office. Not too much again to say about Harrison. He's another one of these presidents that's kind of I'd probably put him probably behind Chester Arthur. He's probably middle C tier here. And that's going to do it for part one of this tier list. Obviously, there's still a lot more presidents to go, and these are obviously going to be some of my more controversial takes because I will be doing every single president. That does include presidents within the last 20 years. So we're going to be doing all of these guys, but hopefully I'll be getting that up by tomorrow. We shall see. Hope you enjoyed this. If you have any differing opinions, if you would put a certain candidate in a different tier, let me know why. But yeah, hope you enjoyed, and that's going to be it for me today.